So let's talk about dams. According to this information I have here from the Society of Civil Engineers, Vermont has 1,219 dams, and 198 of them, or 16%, are high or significant hazard. How dangerous is this, or is it a danger?
Well, I actually did help co-author the report, and it is current. We released it in November. The hazard classification is actually not a measure of danger or a measure of condition. So a high hazard dam actually indicates that if there was a problem with the dam, there could be a loss of life downstream. So if it would fail for some reason. A high hazard dam is not necessarily in bad condition. In fact, in Vermont, most of our high hazard dams are kept up because they have a use, they have owners that are interested in continuing those uses and keep them in good condition. So.
And what are those uses mostly?
The uses aren't necessarily by hazard, but
in general,
dams in general. So about 150 are used for either flood control, water supply, or hydroelectric. Those are the ones I think a lot of people think of when they think of a dam. Those are typically bigger. A lot of times they are the high hazard dams because they are bigger.
Right.
And then we have about 300 to 400 additional dams which are used for recreation, and they run the gamut of size. And then there's another about 700 that actually have no specific listed use in the inventory. So they may have at one point had a use and it's no longer being used for that, or it's just not recorded.
And these are mostly smaller dams, I take it.
You can imagine that they're smaller dams,
right.
Typically.
And are they're privately owned, not by electric companies or municipalities, but municipality wouldn't be privately, but they're just owned by folks who happen to buy them with the property or put them in years ago on their property?
It's a whole variety. Like that 150 dams that are used for the water supply and hydro, those are more of a like a commercial use.
Right.
Whereas you're right, a lot of the smaller ones, the ones without a specific use, would typically be privately owned. About 55% of the dams in Vermont are privately owned.
55% are private. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the others are the state actually owns some dams. Right?
The state does.
Those are fairly larger ones.
It's a wide variety, and they have a wide variety of uses. Some of which are for fish and wildlife. Some may be recreation. They have a range.
So to say that something is high hazard, significant hazard, doesn't mean it's an immediate danger.
No, if it's maintained correctly and was designed correctly in the first place, those dams, the high hazard dams, are inspected yearly.
Right.
And you would hope that with that yearly inspection and the maintenance that would then follow any kind of problem, that they wouldn't pose an immediate threat.
Because we had a huge storm just a few years ago and nothing got swept away. I mean, because of dam breaching.
Yeah.
One dam was partially breached.
Yeah, we had a few that overtopped, some erosion issues, no major failures. So, I would say that we would count ourselves as lucky, and I don't know that we can count on that to continue in additional storms.
So what should we do? So there is some danger.
Yes, I think that the only dam with no danger is no dam.
Right.
Any dam is going to have danger, whether it's maintained or not maintained.
Do we have enough inspectors in the Department of Environmental Conservation who are checking into the safety of these dams?
So in our infrastructure report card, we highlighted that is definitely an issue. We feel like it really needs to be 3 full-time. And maybe the dam safety department itself actually thinks maybe it needs more, but
at least
it does need additional staffing to just keep up with the normal inspection and the other program requirements that they have.
And then the low hazard dams only get inspected very rarely, right?
It is. So they attempt to do it every 5 to 10 years, but they're over 30% behind. I think 37% behind.
How do we know that they're still low hazard if they haven't been inspected for so long?
This is actually one of the big points that I think is very important. If we don't have the information to be able to really evaluate that, we really don't know. So I think that lack of information itself poses a risk. Because if you think about even 10 years, things can change a significant amount in 10 years if no one's gone and looked at it. And if they're not even able to get out there at that 10-year interval, that's just pushing it out even more.
And as you say, they're behind even on the hoped for 5 to 10 year inspection schedule. So there are possibilities then that in certain circumstances, another big storm, and eventually there'll be another big storm, that we could have, if we don't keep up with the inspections and if people don't repair and maintain, we could have a major breach of a dam.
Oh, yeah, there have actually been quite a few in our region. I think Vermont specifically has been very lucky. There was one in Fort Anne that created a lot of damage. And, we've seen even a very small dam that would be below the threshold of our regulatory agency. So there are dams on our landscape that don't even make it onto the list or onto the dam inspection schedule. Because at this point they don't meet the threshold of the 500,000 cubic feet of storage. So those smaller dams aren't even on the inspection list and therefore have no inspection schedule. We do have quite a few that we know fall into that category, and right now the House Bill 37 would propose including those dams on a registry and getting them on some kind of inspection schedule.
And that bill is now, where is that bill right now?
It's in the House. I believe it's still in the House Fish and Wildlife Committee.
Is there pushback? Is there much opposition to it, do you know of?
I testified a few weeks ago, and I know there's been further discussion. I think the dam safety engineers had a few questions about logistics, some big questions about funding. That bill would actually, as part of it, and it was unclear if it was going to be in the fee bill or as part of the specific House Bill 37, but there was a fee structure included that would actually be able to raise some funds to increase staffing and take some of the burden of dam inspection out of the general fund and actually put a little bit of that burden actually on the people who are using the dams themselves.
But potentially even one of these smaller dams could pose a danger.
Oh, significantly.
In a big storm?
A big storm, a lot of different things could happen. I've heard of like a thunderburst where you have, it's not even a widespread flood, but you could have a thunderburst, a lot of rain comes, all of a sudden it's just the straw that broke the camel's back.
And the dam goes, or part of it goes, and the water just rushes downstream and what? And then what?
Well, there's a few things that can happen. It can wash out a culvert or a road downstream. If people are fishing or swimming in that stretch of river, you could get swept away. I think that's one of what I see as one of the bigger risks of these small dams.
So even, as you say, even a very localized storm like that thunderburst, 2 or 3 miles away downstream on that river, the weather could be okay.
Yeah.
And people could be enjoying themselves, and all of a sudden they're
So those are really the scariest things, I think, where you're not expecting the flood and it comes.
We're not in any situation where a whole town, this town, Montpelier, that are on rivers, they're not in danger of being inundated because of a dam, or are we?
Well, typically, if you're talking about the Newsguy River or like a larger river, typically a dam that's across one of those rivers is one of the very large ones.
Right.
It would be on the regular inspection schedule of 1 to 2 years likely. If it's right upstream of a village, then it would likely be classified as a high hazard dam and would be inspected yearly. So that was generally how I would see that.
So the weaknesses in our dams are not, the danger is not some massive catastrophe with hundreds of people being swept wherever they're swept into Lake Champlain or Memphremagog or whatever, but still we could have a much smaller scale but real tragedy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think anyone killed on a dam is a tragedy, even if it's not a whole village.
Right.
So I think that's where the risk lies. You know, a lot of these smaller structures that actually could be, they may not be low hazard. Just because we haven't gone out and looked at them, we don't know. There's the possibility that some of them may actually have had houses built downstream of them and no one even knew there was a dam upstream. I mean, I think that's part of the reason to really want the registry, so you can actually properly evaluate and make a judgment.
Aside from just very quickly, aside from the possible funding objection, because we always have funding objections, I think, in every state, are there people who just think this is none of the state's business to poke around and in my meadow to see if there's a dam, or has that not really arisen?
You know, I haven't really heard of that arising. I think that, we're only talking about 1,200 dams. A lot of them are owned by a municipality or the state or a company. It's 55% are private, and I think a lot of those people possibly may even welcome somebody looking at their dam who knows what's going on. I wouldn't know for sure, but
even without getting into the safety problem, there are those who say that dams clearly alter the natural world, whether they're working well or not. And there are some people who say, especially if they're no longer serving the function for which they were built, we ought to take them down. Do they have a point?
There's a very strong argument to be made for that. Especially if the dam is no longer being used and there's no reason for it to be there. The dams actually create a significant blockage in our river systems, and that's not only for like aquatic organisms like fish who are trying to get by, so it's blocking migrations, it's blocking local populations of the species from being able to interact with each other. But the sediment and debris is also a pretty large issue. I know people became a little more familiar with sediment and debris during Tropical Storm Irene, but you can imagine that if you have a dam in place, a lot of that's getting caught up behind it and can actually cause a more significant issue if the dam fails, because then it's not only the water, but it's also sediment, debris, all of that coming down. Blocking sediment actually causes ecological issues as well. If you have an area of a channel which isn't having the proper sediment it needs, you could be causing additional erosion, bank destabilization, as well as not having the proper sediment and substrate for the ecosystem.